Imagine a shadow that moves silently through the night and leaves no trace behind but fear and devastation. For decades, detectives chased ghosts and collected fingerprints that matched no one in their files, while families waited for answers that never came. Predators lived among their victims as neighbors and friends, and attended community barbecues while hiding dark secrets. This was the terrifying reality for law enforcement before a revolutionary tool changed the landscape of criminal justice forever. The darkness that shielded the most elusive criminals is finally being pierced by the light of science. We are witnessing the end of the golden age of serial killers, thanks to a technique that uses our own history against those who seek to hide. In the middle of the 20th century, police work relied heavily on eyewitness testimony and physical evidence like fingerprints or shoe prints. If a perpetrator had never been arrested before, their fingerprints would not be in any database, and they remained invisible to the law. Detectives would collect blood samples to determine blood type, but this only narrowed the suspect pool down to millions of people, rather than pinpointing a single individual. It was a time when a criminal could move to a new town and change their name to start a fresh life without anyone knowing their dark past. The limitations of forensic science allowed monsters to roam free, while investigators hit dead end after dead end. The terror began in California during the mid-1970s, with a series of burglaries that escalated into violent assaults. The attacker was known by many names, including the Visalia ransacker and the East Area rapist. He was meticulous and careful to wear a mask and gloves while terrorizing victims in their own homes. He would bind his victims and spend hours ransacking their houses to eat their food and take personal souvenirs. Police departments across different counties struggled to connect the dots because they lacked a central database to share information effectively. The community lived in a state of constant panic, as the attacker seemed to know exactly when and where to strike. As the attacks continued, the perpetrator grew more emboldened and escalated his violence to murder. He became known as the original Night Stalker and left a trail of bodies from Sacramento to Orange County. Detectives collected biological evidence from the crime scenes, but in the late 1970s and early 1980s, they had no way to use it to identify the killer. The samples were carefully boxed up and stored in evidence lockers, where they would sit for decades. The killer eventually stopped his spree and vanished into the fabric of society, leaving law enforcement with nothing but cold cases and a terrified public. Years turned into decades, and the files on the Golden State Killer gathered dust in police archives. Technology began to advance, and the introduction of DNA profiling in the late 1980s offered a glimmer of hope. Investigators rushed to test the old evidence and successfully developed a DNA profile of the killer. However, a profile is useless without a name to match it against. They ran the profile through CODIS, which is the national DNA database maintained by the FBI. The system returned no matches because the killer had never been arrested for a felony, and his DNA was not in the system. This was the fundamental flaw in the forensic toolkit of the time, because it relied entirely on recidivism. If a criminal was careful enough to avoid arrest for other crimes, their DNA profile would remain a ghost in the machine. Investigator Paul Holes spent years obsessing over the case and looking for any angle that might reveal the identity of the Golden State Killer. He knew the answer lay in the biological evidence, but the traditional methods had failed completely. He needed a new approach that looked beyond the criminal databases and into the public domain. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, which was the rising popularity of home DNA testing kits for genealogy enthusiasts. Millions of people were spitting into tubes and sending them off to companies to learn about their ethnic heritage and find long-lost relatives. These companies allowed users to download their raw genetic data and upload it to open-source databases like GEDmatch to find wider connections. Paul Holes and a genealogist named Barbara Ray Venter realized that while the killer was not in the police database, his distant relatives might be in the public ones. The concept was simple yet incredibly complex in execution. They would take the DNA from the crime scene and create a fake profile on GEDmatch to see if anyone shared a significant amount of DNA with the killer. They were not looking for the killer himself, but for third cousins or second cousins once removed. It was a digital manhunt that traced bloodlines back to great-great-grandparents and then moved forward in time to fill out the entire family tree. This process is known as forensic genealogy, and it turns a family tree into a roadmap for justice. The investigators found a match that shared a small percentage of DNA with the Golden State Killer, which indicated a distant cousin. This was the starting point. They needed to build a massive family tree that spanned thousands of individuals. They used census records and obituaries and newspaper announcements to piece together the lives of this extended family. They had to find a branch of the tree that led to a male who was the right age and lived in the right locations during the time of the crimes. It was a tedious process of elimination that required immense patience. As they narrowed down the branches of the family tree, they began to exclude individuals based on known facts. Some were too young or too old, while others lived in different states or had died before the crimes occurred. Slowly but surely, the list of potential suspects began to shrink from thousands down to a handful. The genealogy pointed them toward a specific lineage, and eventually they focused on a man who had lived in the areas of the attacks. His name was Joseph James DeAngelo, and he was a former police officer. The revelation that the Golden State Killer might have been a cop sent shockwaves through the investigation team. It explained his tactical knowledge and his ability to evade capture and his understanding of police procedure. DeAngelo had been living a quiet life in the suburbs of Sacramento and was a grandfather who enjoyed fishing and working on his motorcycle. He was the very picture of a normal retiree, and no one in his life suspected that he was responsible for one of the most prolific crime sprees in American history. To confirm their suspicions, investigators set up a surveillance operation outside the home of Joseph James DeAngelo. They could not simply knock on his door and ask for a DNA sample, so they had to wait for him to discard something that contained his genetic material. They watched him for days and waited for him to throw away trash or leave a cup behind at a public place. The tension was palpable as they knew that one mistake could alert him and cause him to destroy evidence or take his own life. Finally, the surveillance team managed to retrieve a discarded item that DeAngelo had used. They rushed it to the lab for a direct comparison against the DNA profile found at the crime scenes decades earlier. The results came back as a perfect match. The ghost that had haunted California for 40 years had finally been given a name and a face. The science of forensic genealogy had succeeded where traditional police work had failed for nearly half a century. On a sunny afternoon in April 2018, police teams descended on the home of Joseph James DeAngelo. He was working in his garage when officers swarmed the driveway and took him into custody. He appeared confused and frail, which was a stark contrast to the athletic and terrifying figure described by his victims. The arrest made headlines around the world and introduced the public to the term forensic genealogy. It was a watershed moment that signaled a new era in criminal investigation. The capture of the Golden State Killer opened the floodgates for cold cases across the United States. Police departments realized that they had thousands of unsolved murders and sexual assaults with preserved DNA evidence. They began to partner with genetic genealogists to apply the same technique that caught DeAngelo. Within months, dozens of cold cases were being solved, and families who had lost hope were finally getting the closure they deserved. The method was proving to be a universal key for unlocking the secrets of the past. One such case was the murder of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg in Washington state, which had gone unsolved since 1987. Investigators used the same genealogical approach to identify William Earl Talbot II as the suspect. He was a truck driver who had never been on the police radar. His conviction was the first ever to be obtained through a jury trial using forensic genealogy. It validated the method in a court of law and set a legal precedent for future cases. However, the rapid rise of this technology raised significant ethical questions regarding privacy and consent. Critics argued that people who uploaded their DNA to genealogy sites did not consent to having their genetic information used in criminal investigations. They pointed out that by uploading your own DNA, you were effectively implicating all your biological relatives without their permission. The debate sparked a conversation about the balance between public safety and personal privacy in the digital age. In response to these concerns, major genealogy databases updated their terms of service. GEDmatch implemented a system where users had to opt in to allow law enforcement to access their data. This significantly reduced the pool of available genetic profiles and made the work of forensic genealogists more difficult. Despite these hurdles, the technique remained a powerful tool, and investigators adapted by seeking warrants to access the databases when necessary. The impact of forensic genealogy extends beyond just catching killers, as it is also used to identify John and Jane Does. For decades, unidentified bodies were buried in pauper graves with no names on their headstones. Now forensic artists and genealogists are working together to give these individuals their names back. They are reuniting remains with families who never stopped looking for their missing loved ones. It is a humanitarian effort that brings dignity to the deceased and peace to the living. The story of the boy in the box is a poignant example of this humanitarian application. In 1957, the battered body of a young boy was found in a cardboard box in Philadelphia. For 65 years, his identity remained a mystery, despite tireless efforts by investigators. In 2022, thanks to forensic genealogy, he was finally identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. While his killer has not yet been brought to justice, knowing his name was a monumental victory for those who had kept his memory alive. As the technology continues to evolve, it is becoming even more sensitive and capable of working with degraded DNA samples. Scientists are now able to extract usable genetic information from rootless hair and old bones that were previously thought to be useless. This means that cases from the early 20th century and potentially even older could theoretically be solved. The window of accountability for criminals is expanding backward in time. The psychological impact on active criminals is also profound because they can no longer rely on the passage of time to protect them. A killer who committed a crime 30 years ago must now look over their shoulder and wonder if a distant cousin just uploaded their DNA to a website. The knowledge that their own biology is a ticking time bomb creates a new kind of pressure. It serves as a deterrent and a promise that justice has no expiration date. Forensic genealogy is not a magic wand, and it requires thousands of hours of skilled research to be effective. It involves navigating complex family trees, with cases of adoption and illegitimacy and name changes. A single error in the tree can lead investigators down the wrong path for months. It is a discipline that combines the precision of hard science with the intuition of historical research. The genealogists who do this work are the unsung heroes of the modern justice system. There are still thousands of cold cases sitting in evidence lockers waiting for their turn to be analyzed. Funding is often a major hurdle because this type of testing and research is expensive. Nonprofit organizations and crowdfunding campaigns have emerged to help pay for the costs of identifying victims and catching killers. The public interest in true crime has helped fuel these efforts and turn passive observers into active participants in the quest for justice. The legacy of the Golden State Killer investigation is a safer world where anonymity is much harder to maintain for violent offenders. It has forced a reevaluation of how we handle genetic privacy and how we police our communities. The collaboration between law enforcement and the genealogy community has created a formidable alliance. We are moving toward a future where the term unsolved mystery may become a relic of the past. We must also consider the families of the suspects who are caught through this method. Innocent people discover that their father or brother or uncle is a monster who committed terrible acts. They often have to grapple with the guilt of being the genetic link that led to the arrest. Their lives are turned upside down, and they become collateral damage in the pursuit of truth. It is a complex web of trauma that extends far beyond the original victims. Despite the controversies and the costs, the consensus is that the benefits of forensic genealogy outweigh the risks. The ability to remove violent predators from the streets and provide answers to grieving families is invaluable. Every time a cold case is solved, it restores a small piece of faith in the justice system. It sends a message that society will never give up on the victims of violent crime, no matter how much time has passed. Looking ahead, we can expect to see this technology integrated more standardly into police investigations. Instead of being a last resort for cold cases, it may become a primary tool used in the early stages of an investigation. As databases grow and sequencing technology becomes cheaper, the process will become faster and more accessible. The era of the anonymous criminal is rapidly coming to a close. The story of forensic genealogy is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of truth. It reminds us that the past is never truly gone, and that the clues to solve the greatest mysteries are written in our very cells. From the dark streets of California in the 1970s to the high-tech labs of today, the journey has been long and difficult. But for the victims who waited decades for justice, the arrival of this technology is nothing short of a miracle. As we close the docket on this case, we are left with a chilling thought for those who think they have gotten away with murder. You may have scrubbed the crime scene and burned the evidence and changed your name. But you cannot change your DNA, and you cannot choose your relatives. Somewhere out there, a second cousin is buying a testing kit, and your secrets are about to be revealed. The clock is ticking, and science is coming for you.